the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to...
All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
There we go. Sorry, guys. I was struggling with that mute button again. One of these days, I'm going to defeat it. I swear to you, it's worse than Caesar the Wrestling Bear. There's a story behind that. But I'm not going to tell it. So hello, and welcome to HBR Talk 253, The Truth About Feminists and Due Process. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks, and we also have our own Dr. Randomer Cam, the physician of perceptivity.
You have a blurb for me, do you?
Yes, I do. You have to be the physician of perceptivity.
All right, I'm not a real doctor, by the way. We know medical advice.
I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what, Mike. You probably would offer better medical advice than half the doctors that I've been to.
I cannot even confirm that or deny it.
No, you can't. and the sad thing is, like, we can joke around about that, and people will take it seriously and be like, "She said Mike's a real doctor." But seriously,
and believe it or not, my name is not Randomacam, for I am not Indian.
Nope. Mike Stevenson. So, and I'm pronouncing it right. It's not Stephenson.
Yes, thank you. I'm okay with either. It comes from the original Norse, which is pronounced Stephenson.
Yeah, but, that's true. That's true.
It's been developed into the English/Celtic, which is Stevenson. But I'm fine with either, because I don't mind being a fucking Viking. Go for it.
Well, see, like I've got parts of my family that have names that have if you pronounce them phonetically based on how they're spelled, you would have a rough time. You'd think their name included the word ham, but actually it's not ham. And
do you ever get
Wallen?
Do you ever get Hannah Wallen?
Yeah. Oh no. There's a Wayland Boulevard that is not spelled like my name here in Dayton, and so people call me Wayland all the time, Hannah Wayland. And I always thought, you know what?
Right.
Yeah, with an H. So I always thought, if I ever developed any real skill at singing, and had a career in that, that would be, I'd just go by Wayland Hannah. That would be it. But yeah. So that's that.
And by the way, Hannah did tell us the story of Caesar the wrestling bear way back in I think it was Nerdcast episode 3.
Oh yeah.
That was 9 years ago. If any of you are willing to trudge that,
I should
that
tell
far
it.
back,
I got dragged into there was this I don't know what to call it, and it's not an attraction exactly. It was a traveling thing, and I don't think they still do it anymore. I don't think there is such a thing anymore. But
I should bloody hope so. Like come and wrestle this bear, even if it's one of those pussy ass black bears. It's still a fucking bear.
Well, that's the thing. The bear was they said the bear weighed 1,000 pounds. My wrestling partner, because they didn't allow women to wrestle the bear alone. But my wrestling partner was a weightlifter, and she was a shot putter on the track team, and she was like, that's not 1,000 pounds, that's maybe 750, and so like, okay, so they overestimated the weight of the bear. Doesn't change anything for me, because like I think I was in the wrestling ring for a few seconds when the bear swiped me behind the knee and knocked me over. And like they tell you to roll over immediately on your belly because the bear is going to use you for a chew toy. And that's what he did. He chewed on my ass for like 5 minutes. Like that was my whole experience wrestling a bear. Literally just 5 minutes getting my ass chewed. So it wasn't really any different than being at work. But except afterward, I like, it was exhausting too because the damn thing sat on me. 750-pound bear on my back, chewing on my butt, slobbering all over me, and then the next day, because I went back to the dorm and I was too tired to do anything with my laundry. Just showered, changed, went to bed. I get up the next morning, and the underwear and the jeans that had the bear slobber on them, I had left them in a crumpled set of heaps on the floor. And when I picked them up, they were like crumpled cardboard. And it was just like, oh, okay, well, let me just put those in the dumpster. I'm not putting that through like the washing machine because I don't know what that's going to do to the washing machine. And it's not even my washing machine. It was the college's washing machine. So, God, like, it's just great if I damage that. Everybody suffers, right? So that was my bear wrestling experience.
Just don't fight bears, people. It's either bad for you or it's bad for the bear.
Yeah. Well, the worst part about it was like, the bear was basically like a big dog, but there's a problem with assuming that all the time. And there's constant stories coming out of people that try to keep wild animals in captivity. Like, don't do that. They're not meant for that. And their instincts can be triggered in ways that humans have a rough time predicting. Absolutely don't do that. And people have kept bears for pets for years and been perfectly comfortable with them, and the bear's perfectly comfortable with the person, and everything's all hunky-dory, the bear's well fed, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden one day a neighbor comes over and they find what's left of the owner of the bear after the bear ate all the good parts. And it was like no way of knowing what happened, what caused it, So if I had, the opportunity to do that today, there's no way I would do it. But back then, 18 years old, I'm like, this is going to be my only chance to ever get this close to a bear and not get eaten. And of course I was wrong. He still ate my ass. And like bears, when you say like woozy ass black bear, If you go to Yosemite,
I only mean compared to a grizzly bear.
Yeah, oh yeah, a grizzly will like eat a black bear. But if you go to Yosemite and a black bear thinks there's food in your car, it will literally peel the doors back like a can opener. It will bust the windows out and get in. They're strong. They're incredibly strong, and getting away from them is not easy. You can't just climb a tree to get away from a bear, because they'll just climb right up after you.
Black bears are terrifyingly good at climbing trees.
Yeah.
They can climb faster than they can run.
Yeah.
It's scary.
They can jump up trees. There's videos out of Russia where they've come into communities and people have been chased by a bear, and somebody's filming them and laughing, he's getting chased by a bear, and there's a guy climbing up a tree and the bear is biting him and everything. Like, it's...
fuck that.
I will give them this. Russians are tough.
Yeah.
Somebody, like, I'd be shitting myself at that point, right?
So you want Ukrainians to die, do you, Hannah?
Ukrainians are pretty fucking tough, too. But it's just like that thing my brother and I argued over until my dad shut us up in the car one time. Who would win in a fight between a polar bear and a saber-toothed tiger? There you go. That's Russia versus Ukraine. Polar bear and a saber-toothed tiger. But with that out of the way, we do have a serious topic tonight, and it is one like this is something that I'm pretty passionate about, because this was my entry into the online men's rights movement. This is me entering into an actual formal movement. I'm echoing on somebody. And I can't tell, but because I can't see the Discord right now.
It's Lauren.
Lauren, can you mute for a second? So I'll go over my little spiel here, but everybody that's been long-time listeners has heard me mention the 7 years in hell story numerous times. Just want to briefly go over that real quick before I go over this other stuff. My entry into the men's rights movement started with not the first case I saw, but I want to say like the fifth or sixth case I saw of false allegations of intimate partner and sexual violence against men that I knew, who, the false accuser was using the accusation for something. And in this instance, this is in the Dayton metro area. This case, the accuser, they had divorced, and they had 50-50 shared custody. 4 days with mom, 4 days with dad. That was going to change when school started to 7 and 7. And the divorced ex-wife had a new partner. This is who she divorced for. She was cheating with that guy, got pregnant, the divorce happened, and the custody agreement happened. And, dad was paying child support, stepdad was there, and so on. Well, mom and stepdad had a violent relationship, and mom also ignored the kid. And so the kid did what kids do when they're ignored by their parents. They become annoying to get the attention they need. And so stepdad beat her black and blue. It's a 4-year-old little kid. Bruises on her face. Stepmom, and this is like maybe a year after the divorce, stepmom had the wherewithal to take pictures, and so Child Protective Services gave dad protective custody. And when protective custody happened, biological mom started making false allegations. Like, within days of the custody transfer, the cops were at their house investigating. Well, first she started trying to use occult, like, oh, they're witches. They're in a cult. He has demonic tattoos. She was actually referring to a Disney character as a demonic tattoo, and bunch of other stuff that, like, the court really isn't allowed to consider. Like, you're allowed to be a witch. Your parents or your kids can't be taken away from you because you practice witchcraft. It's a religion. So there was a bunch of that, and then when that didn't work, she started claiming that he had assaulted her and all kinds of stuff. And the first time, we were lucky, she made the mistake of choosing a time when he was on video, provably somewhere else. And after that, as a group of friends, we all realized that we were going to have to make sure that was the case with every minute of his time, because she had already established a pattern of behavior, and we didn't think this was going to stop. And like, that was all in the first couple months. We thought, boy, this is going to last at least a year. We had no idea it was going to last 7. And she went through everything from an allegation as ridiculous as a drive-by greeting that never happened, which normally, you drive by and you wave at somebody, it doesn't matter. Like, you're allowed to do that, but she had a false restraining order on him. So accusing him of driving by and waving at her is enough to get him taken in for questioning.
Menacingly!
Yes, menacingly. He waved menacingly, because that's a thing. And of course, the fact that she was supposed to be halfway across the country in another state at the time, and the bar didn't actually have any windows that she claimed he drove past, that she claimed she was in. So he had no way of knowing if she was in there, even if he had driven past. Like, it would have been a silly allegation all around. But it was taken seriously, and he was taken in for questioning and kept without food or water for 12 hours at the police station in Dayton. There were several things like that. And her worst allegation, her most serious allegation, was actual rape, which she again accused a time and place, and he had video to prove that he was somewhere else doing something else at that time, and so he couldn't be in that place. So she went back to the detective and changed the time, and he had video of that time as well. Nope, this is where I was, and a receipt. And again, she goes back, she changes the day. Oh, I had the wrong day. I forgot what day I was raped. Like, and this, we're not talking about like 20 years ago where you might get the day wrong because the memory is 20 years old. We're talking about a couple of weeks. And so she changes it a third time, and they call him in for questioning again, and his lawyer comes in and says, if you don't quit doing this and accepting this ever-changing, incredible story, I'm going to file a discrimination complaint. And that ended the rape allegations. But what ultimately ended this whole thing was a vexatious litigant civil case that he filed against her. And they went into court with 4 reams, 8 inches of paperwork from her filings in various court cases where she'd filed against him. That actually is what, like, the judge looked at that and was like, you gotta be kidding me. They didn't go through all the paperwork. Just the fact that she had done that much court filing and made that many allegations, and every case that they were involved in, from child support and custody to her allegations against him to any kind of maneuvering in the case, the false restraining orders and everything. Like, it led to a finding that she was a vexatious litigant, and she's basically not allowed to do anything to him now. But even that was problematic, because when they filed, the clerk of courts misplaced the filing for a year. So it took 2 years. The last 2 years of the 7 years in hell case was fighting to get the vexatious litigant case heard, the hearing itself, and then her appeal of the vexatious litigant hearing, in which she alleged that because he defended himself every time she made a false allegation, that constituted vexatious litigation. Literally said, you're not allowed to defend yourself. You're aggressive if you defend yourself against my aggression. And so that's the history that I'm coming to this with. And I also want to say, with regard to the articles that we're going to go over, this is not new. Everything they're asking for is already funded by the Violence Against Women Act. So this is, these grifters are asking for more money to pay for something that's already paid for. So that's just something to keep in mind as we read this. But before...
and be thankful that it's still possible to charge a woman with vexatious litigation, if it still is, practically. I mean, it might not be practically, but we may be facing a future not far from here where it's not even possible legally. Because that's the Overton window keeps getting pushed.
Well, I will tell you this. The National Organization for Women sent an alert out to women's organizations about the result of that case. So that should tell you something. I don't have it anymore, but that was a hell of a thing to find. I failed to... Xeranx gave us $5.
He's being sarcastic. I'm pretty sure he's being sarcastic.
Like, that's confusing, Xeranx. Xeranx gave us $5 and said, Hannah, it's very irresponsible of you to have kept quiet during Kavanaugh's hearing. We tell people to report culprits for a reason. Shame on you. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. And HBR Vitality supplements. Oh, geez. So we should start selling a swift kick in the ass. There we go. But yeah, before we get into the articles and everything, I do have to do what I gotta do. So remember, everybody, that as always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences, both recent and long past, have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platforms tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that, when will HBR get the Dollar Shave Club and Raid Shadow Legends? You know what? I actually have Raid Shadow Legends on my phone, and I don't think I've played it in a year. But I don't want to take it off because of the sunken cost fallacy. I haven't spent money on it. It's just I put a lot of time into it when I first played it, because it is a fun game. I don't have time to play it now.
Yeah.
So I have no idea whether it's still a fun game or not.
And it drains the fucking battery on my phone, man. That's like not cool.
And yet no one's going to sponsor Honey Badger Radio. We're
No,
what's
they
known
don't
as a
like us.
reputational risk.
Yeah. Like, as far as phone games are concerned, I don't know. As far as phone games are concerned, like the one I use the most is actually one of those OCD feeding, match this many things and you get this next level up and so on. And
Yes.
I just, when I'm annoyed and I don't have something that it's reasonable for me to clean it, then I do that. Like, because that helps calm me down. So there you go. And of course, during the last couple of years, I advanced quite a bit in that game. So I mean, it's been a very upsetting last couple of years, I guess you could say. But in any case, to the articles, I wanted to point out one other thing. Like, we hear from feminists all the time. They're not the ones attacking fathers' custody. Fathers don't have difficulty getting custody. The reason that the courts don't give fathers custody of their kids is is because fathers don't ask for it, or because the presumption is that women are better parents, and blah, 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 blah. Well, here we go. This is feminist lobbied legislation. Nobody else is going to lobby for this. This is lobbied for by organizations that grift on domestic abuse, on the idea of male-perpetrated, female-experienced domestic abuse. The smallest percentage of domestic abuse that happens is male-only perpetrated abuse, and the second smallest is male-only perpetrated abuse specifically against women.
And we're not using the word grift lightly there.
Right.
It means people who make money from shit that they can't really, not that they don't believe, but they can't uphold that belief. But they most definitely make ungodly amounts of money from proclaiming things that they can't really uphold.
Well,
it's not the same as someone on YouTube saying things they believe and making bugger all money from it.
They claim to be doing
the significant
something.
difference.
They claim to be doing something very specific, and a lot of times they're not. And this is an area that really is rough for me, because I've had friends of both sexes who have experienced domestic violence, and I've had one friend that was in that 13% or whatever of domestic violence that is male only perpetrated against only a female. And like, honestly, the guy never grew up that did that. His family history, like, if I gave you that information, you would understand how he turned out the way he turned out. But he was basically a psychopath. And a guy basically has to be a psychopath to end up in that percentage where he's using violence to try to get what he wants instead of negotiation. And that's whether he's attacking a male partner or a female partner. Like, that's adult men and women don't do that unless there is something wrong with them. Mm-hmm. And that's what was wrong with him. But in any case, yeah, this is so. What we hear from feminists all the time, though, is, none of that's true. It's mostly patriarchal men trying to control the whole female sex by beating their wives, and power and control and blah blah blah. Right, that's their belief, and they promote that through these organizations that really don't help. If a woman is it fits in that mold, she gets all the help she needs. But if an abuse victim is not a woman, or is a woman who doesn't fit in that mold, like the 7 years in hell accuser was violent. She initiated violence with her second husband all the time, and he actually did 18 months for trying to get out of a room where she was throwing heavy knickknacks and small appliances at him. That was really kind of a weird situation, because everybody was like, well, he didn't go to jail for beating the kid, so this is sort of karma. But the whole time I'm going, no, that's not okay. He has to be accountable for the thing that he did do, and not railroaded for the thing that he didn't do. Because we're talking about how our court system works, and if he's not accountable for the thing he did do, then other people might not be accountable for things they did to people you care about, right? And if he's railroaded for something he didn't do, that can happen to anybody, including our friend that's going through all of this. So we don't want the courts to work that way. It's not all the same. Due process is vital. And the whole point of due process, the only point of due process, is to make sure that when the state takes action against a citizen on the basis of a court ruling, that is a result of fact and logic and legal standards that are real and solid and sound and trustworthy. so that we're not railroading somebody who did not do what they're accused of, right? That's it. That's what due process is all about. It is your protection against having the state do something to you on the basis of a false allegation. Right? It's on the basis of something that is not true. It's not provable. And as it's not just the citizen's right to not be run over by the state. There's also your right as a taxpayer. You have the right, and I have the right, to know that if we are going to be paying for this system, that it's not going to be doing reprehensible things in our name.
Yep.
Right? I don't want to pay thugs to lock up innocent people for nothing more than a false allegation. Right? I'm not spending money on that on purpose. I don't want to pay for that. I know if I don't pay my taxes that those same thugs are going to come to my house and put me in jail, right? So that's basically, and of course they take it out of my paycheck before I get my check. My employer pays taxes on my behalf, whether I consent to it or not, and there's not really a good way to get out of that. So there you go. If we're going to have that kind of a system, then we have the right to expect that system will act on truth and fact and logic. And when it doesn't, we have the right to protest against it. So here's what feminists are going for. Let's take a look at this is basically, like I said, feminist lobbied proposed legislation. Is this going to be about balance or fairness? Or will it give divorcing mothers a weapon to separate their children from their fathers on false allegations?
Think we know how this is gonna go.
Yeah, I do too. And this pisses me off. I can't tell you how much this pisses me off. I probably could, but then YouTube would take the video down.
It's like, is it a right that exists secondarily because the government exists, or is it one of those rights that gets ahead of the government and tells the government what to do and what to change in terms of? Because people have different ideas of what rights means. There's natural human rights, the right to live, the right to eat, the right to reproduce, which have existed since long before governments have existed. And then there's the governments. Then there's the rights that only exist under this robotic system we call the government. And yes, a lot of us men's rights advocates talk about things in terms of those secondary rights, and yeah, believe me, we would rather we didn't have to put things in terms of what the government does to us. But we're just saying, if we're going to live under this government, under which we're giving all these concessions to everyone but men, we're going to be like, maybe given this system we can give these rights to men as well. We would rather not. We would rather the government just shrank to its smallest possible size, and we didn't have to worry about any rights other than natural rights. But this is where we are, and if that's where the ball lies, that's where we're gonna play the ball. Yeah. And this is where the ball lies. Women are demanding all this kind of shit, and first things first, women don't deserve all those fucking rights, but if they do, men deserve them too. So yeah, go on.
Yeah. Oh well, and something else that I'll go over real briefly then, since we're talking about rights. You know, and we did a video on this a while back, and I think it's one of the ones that actually got force privated. But the concept of human rights is based on the concept of self-ownership, human autonomy. You have, as an individual, you're a person with thoughts and experiences and boundaries between yourself and the next person that are sort of the demarcation of what it's okay for you to do and what's not okay for you to do. And those boundaries are defined by concepts of human rights. And when we talk about those concepts, you know, we talk about concepts like non-aggression, where your bodily autonomy right, your right to bodily integrity, those are defended by a social standard of not starting the aggression. Don't hit first, and there will be no hitting. And you have the right to defend yourself if somebody does hit first, based on that idea. That's human rights, right? Civil rights take the government into consideration. And your government is defined usually in terms of responsibility and authority. It has responsibility for certain things, and it has authority in order to carry out those responsibilities. And that's in terms of the type of government that we have now. Government that existed for centuries prior to like a representative republic or democracies and stuff like that, where it was monarchy and similar structures. That was all based on the idea of divine right to rule. So you had authority as the main defining characteristic of government. So throughout history, authority has been a main defining characteristic of government, whether it was accompanied by responsibility or not, and or whether it was accompanied by accountability or not. And your civil rights define the boundaries between government authority and your individual autonomy. And so due process defines the boundary from between the government's authority over you as an individual and your right to pursue happiness, to experience liberty, and to live. And the rights that accompany those, that like sort of sub-rights, the rights to not be subject to unreasonable search and seizure and so on. All those stem from your natural right to autonomy and the boundary between that right and the right we afford government to its authority.
A good point of reference as to where the rubber meets the road is you have the natural human right to eat, but you don't have the right to food. Now, that sounds on its surface like surely it's the same thing. If you have no, it isn't. Eating is something that all animals and all organisms do and have done since the dawn of life. But it's not the same as having the right to food. You cannot be given the right to eat. You already have it. But being given the right to food means being given food, and that food has to come from somewhere else.
Right.
And that's why they're completely different things.
This is where authoritarian collectivists that want to impose a collectivist system on people through confiscation of personal property and redistribution and so on, right? Mistake, I guess you could say passive rights for active rights. You have the right to pursue happiness. That right doesn't give you anything. It means you have to pursue that right. It's not handed to you. It doesn't mean you have the right to happiness. And your pursuit of happiness, your right to the pursuit of happiness, has limits. You can't violate someone else's right to bodily autonomy in order to pursue that happiness. You can't violate somebody else's right to life in order to pursue that happiness. And your right to pursue happiness doesn't outweigh other people's right to pursue happiness. It's equal, right? So those rights don't give you an automatic right to demand that somebody gives you what would make you happy. It means you have the right to do the work to get there. And it means that if you like a particular type of music, you have the right to listen to that type of music, but you don't have the right to make your neighbor listen to it.
It means
you don't have the right to make somebody play that type of music for you if you want that music. It's you just have the right to choose which types of music you strive to obtain. You can't do it through aggressive means, and that's that situation. But when you get into due process, it translates into your right to liberty translates into the government doesn't have a right to take away your liberty without proving that you violated someone else's rights on a level that merits controlling your movement in order to prevent you from doing that again.
And I'm going to go there. You absolutely have the right to take a scalpel to your own body, even the most sensitive parts of your own body, so as to reshape those parts into whatever you like. But you don't have the right to force surgeons to do that for you. Shall we perhaps move on?
Yeah. So there we go. When we read through this, you're reading it, with an understanding of what rights are under discussion and what we mean by rights and the boundaries between citizen and government and so on. So the main article we're going to go over, I'm going to point out, there's two articles I'm going to point out. The main one I'm going to point out, proposed legislation would increase domestic violence, child abuse training for custody cases. Now, it's a badly written headline to begin with because it sounds like the legislation would actually increase domestic violence.
Yeah.
And when it means domestic violence training and child abuse training for custody cases, right? So the other article, this one, we have this, the first one is out of Colorado. And the second one says, proposed MD legislation. That's not medical doctor, it's Maryland. Maryland legislation could increase training for child custody evaluators, right? And they're looking to increase qualification and training standards for child custody evaluators. Senate Bill 13, and immediately get into protecting children. So they're talking about making recommendations to judges regarding child abuse, and so it's the same kind of case right here, same kind of legislation. So as we go through the Colorado article, be aware, if you live in Maryland, this is happening in your state too. So you'll want to look up, when we keep talking about this, in Maryland, you're going to want to look up Senate Bill 13 and look into it, because Child Protective Services and child custody evaluators have been around for decades. This isn't a new profession. It's not a new system. So this is all stuff that already exists and is being funded, and they're wanting to dramatically increase the weight that is carried by allegations of abuse without any kind of evidence of the abuse. Domestic violence survivors. Gosh darn it. I hate it when the website is designed to jump up and it snaps too, and there's no turning off the snap too. So I guess this is what we're going to deal with. All right, domestic violence survivors are fighting for custody of their children. Often, who are fighting for custody of their children often fear they're not being heard, and worry warning signs are being missed in family court. So my first attack here is going to be on the "I'm not being heard" complaint, because I hate this. And this is a female thing. I don't usually hear men saying this. Once in a while I'll hear men saying it, but it's something they've picked up from women. Right? You get into an argument with a woman. She states her case. You state your case. You address the points that she has made with arguments that either accept or dismiss them. If your arguments dismiss her points because you feel you have discredited her points, she says she feels that she hasn't been heard.
Exactly.
No, you've been heard. I disagreed with you.
Right. There's the conflation of being not being heard or listened to, and being actually, your argument being taken for its merits. No, you're just wrong. I've explained to you why you're wrong. It's not that you're not being heard. It's just you're wrong.
I have the right to not be wrong.
Yeah. Right.
And I've actually had arguments with women where they've said that, and I've said, what did you say that you think I didn't address? And then if they repeat something that they've said that I have addressed, I can say, well, no, I addressed that with this. My argument is X. And I feel that X discredits the thing that you said, or X, addresses it and deals with it so that it's off the table. However that. And so it's not that you haven't been heard. I need you to tell me how X doesn't do what I think it does. And they can't do that, and that's where they're saying they haven't been heard.
Yeah.
And the same women who do that I'll make a direct statement about something. Like you have an argument, imagine the Johnny Depp experience of there being poop on the bed, except he's home, right? So you come into your room and there's poop on the bed. So you say, there's poop on the bed. And she says, well, the dogs did it. And you say, well, that's awfully big for these itty-bitty little dogs. I've never seen them make poop this big. I don't think that's the case. Well, I just haven't been heard. Yes, actually, you have been heard.
And
I'm
smelled.
disagreeing. I'm disagreeing with your assessment that the poop came from the dogs. Do you have another suggestion? And then, even if you haven't said you put the poop on the bed, the woman turns around and says, well, I can't believe you think I did this. Well, I didn't say you did it. But now the argument is over whether or not she did it, and your accusation that you didn't make. And this happens all the time. I'll be in a conversation with a woman, and I will address her points, and she will either have to acknowledge that I addressed her points, or just gloss over the fact that I addressed her points in order to claim not to be heard. But then when she answers me, she goes off on a tangent and answers something that I didn't say because she can't deal with what I did say. And it's one of the reasons why my coworkers suggested that I might want to get evaluated for autism, because I think rationally and speak directly instead of beating around the bush and then complaining that I haven't been heard. No pun intended there, by the way.
And bear in mind, Johnny Depp went through approximately 6 years in hell.
Yep.
over this case, and everyone's treating it like it's this new thing that changed the scene. And I guess it did, because Johnny Depp is so popular. But Hannah's story about the 7 years in hell case just goes to show you how long this thing has been going on. And I guess 7 years is nothing compared to other cases.
Oh yeah, that's not the worst story I have.
That we're not allowed to know about. There have been guys who have gone through a lifetime of a case in hell, and that's only until it gets settled. I mean, even Johnny Depp went through 6 years of hell and an ongoing God knows how many years of purgatory.
There are guys that don't survive.
Yeah,
exactly. There's guys who just suffer in silence. They don't say anything. They just live with it. Because what else is the option besides financial ruin?
One of my friends, 25 years. The only reason the 7 years in hell case is the one that I wrote about is because I had enough documentation to back it up. I don't have a lot of documentation on the 25-year case. And the 25-year case had about 15, 20 years in court, and 5 years of her using gynocentrism within the community to get other people to engage in proxy violence against him on her behalf. So we're talking a quarter of a century, like almost the entirety of the 21st century. Actually, almost the entirety of it has been 21st century. But it started in the 20th century, and so it spans 2 centuries.
That's just if we treat things individually.
Yeah.
If we were to dare to treat men as a collective, not that I would, because very few of us here are into the idea of collectivism. But if we did treat men as a collective, then how many years of hell have men gone through in this particular
Thousands,
context?
actually.
It's at least thousands. It's at least thousands.
Women have been using false allegations to cover their asses, to get things they wanted, to force men into marriage, to gain money or power, or otherwise manipulate society for so long that there are multiple stories about it in the Bible. Like, it's something that it was common enough in society that a book of parables used parables about that. A book with that gave an accounting of history, talked about historical instances of it. Like, this is Old Testament shit.
And then there's the Bhagavad Gita, the oldest religion we know, and even they have stories about women burning shit down. It's as long as we've had stories warning us about what happens if you give women all the power in the world. But we don't listen. We just don't listen.
No.
So, this story is considered romantic by female Christian standards, but the idea of force, is a little different today than it was. You were coerced by reputational damage as a man back in the day. If you read the story of Ruth and Boaz, Ruth was instructed to go and lay down at the foot of his bedroll where he was sleeping, to basically make it look like they had been sleeping together, because that would obligate him to marry her. And in the story, he says to her, "Oh, you don't have to do this. I'm going to marry you anyway." But like, that should be a red flag, right? But that would have been the situation. He would have been obligated, and if he didn't, it would have dishonored both of them. But and of course there are preachers that give this lecture that I don't know who originated it, about finding your Boaz, as women, finding their Boaz, and don't make the mistake of instead hooking up with dumbass, drunk-ass, and a bunch of other, like, as being ass. And I've seen it a few times, and it's like, yeah, you better shop around, ladies. Pick a good guy, which isn't bad advice for women. Guys should get the same advice about women, right? Mm-hmm. But that would be one. There are other stories that I can't think of off the top of my head. There are other stories where marriage was coerced in the Bible, and not just women being coerced, men being coerced. And of course, the old laws basically said if a woman accused a guy of rape, and she had enough credibility, enough witnesses to make it threatening to him, his way of surviving would be to marry her. So that would incentivize false rape allegations right there. And she didn't have to consent to marry him. But, if she didn't consent to marry him, he got the death penalty. So, like, that's historically, like, false allegations are nothing new. Like, humanity has known about them and dealt with them for centuries. The difference today is we have a women's movement that is advocating on the idea that they don't matter, that the falsely accused, if they are male, do not have a right to be treated fairly, to not have action taken against them unless the allegation is proven true, and do not have a right to their bodily autonomy, their integrity, their freedom of choice, their liberty, if they're accused. Right? So you had a bunch of historical reality before we got to this point where men's right to due process, in light of women's allegations, is being treated like it's an attack on women. But that's where we are now. So this not being heard thing, yeah, they're being heard. They can go into court and testify. It's that their testimony, the objection is that their testimony alone is not enough to prove the case and cause court action against the father of their children, preventing him from exercising his custody rights.
Right.
So that's what this really is. A proposed law in Colorado, HB 23-1178, would increase domestic violence training requirements for court personnel, like parental responsibility evaluators and mediators. Now, mind you, again, the Violence Against Women Act funded that kind of training starting in 1994, increasing during the Obama administration with a bunch of formula grants, and none of that's ever been reduced. Like, no president has signed legislation that eliminated that money. It's only been increased every couple of years as the Violence Against Women Act gets reauthorized. So they're asking for state funding for something that federal funding already pays for. And that's your money.
Yep, more Gibbs.
Yep. You're paying for this. You're paying the state to tell evaluators, the friends of the court, the guardian ad litem, the judge, the magistrate, the bailiff, everybody involved in your case if you get divorced, that if your ex-wife just says you abuse her, that your custody rights should be mitigated based on that.
And yeah, Trump's not going to change this, and DeSantis isn't going to change this. They're more interested in other things, like figuring out what the hell's going on in our own countries. In Trump's case, it's the woke shit. In DeSantis's case, it's the medical tyranny and such. But neither of them are addressing this, which arguably is where all this came from. Like I've attempted to explain in other videos, it seems to be part of human nature that women favor protection over freedom and men favor freedom over protection. And we've found ourselves in this governmental situation where protection is incentivized over freedom in every aspect of our lives. And the only people even trying to address this are addressing the symptoms rather than the causes. And this is all the more reason to vote people in who are at least addressing the symptoms rather than just progressing the symptoms. And yes, I mean progressive in quite the right way, in the way, well, and the wrong way. You know what I mean? The people have got very much the wrong idea of what progressive is. It's screwing over the people of the country they're supposed to be, serving.
Yeah, the problem
what they call progress. But yeah, no one's actually addressing the root of the problem, which is this imbalance between the yin of masculinity and the yang of femininity. Everyone keeps leaning towards the yang of femininity, i.e., let's protect everyone. Never mind freedom. Protection is more important. Oh, look, women aren't being protected enough. Let's protect the women. Like, how about freedom? No, that's misogyny.
See, and the only thing that I can say to that is that the Trumps and DeSantises of our time right now are trying to address the problems that have been created from this situation, from exactly what you're saying. Trying to, it's like, how do you turn the ship around? You know what I mean? Where do you start? Because in the current moment, we have major problems right, that need to be addressed if we are to ever have a chance of even addressing these situations, because it's just spun so out of control. You know, I mean, how do we begin to come back and address the issue between men and women when we've got fucking war on our shores? You know,
this is a really tough one too, because there are arguments for why men shouldn't have to depend on women in battle as colleagues in battle, right? There are definite arguments for why women shouldn't be exempt, right? You're looking at it goes both ways, but the reality is, we can't just not deal with the fact that women don't protect civil rights. Women don't do anything as a population to protect civil rights. In fact, women have been attacking them for centuries.
Yeah.
And not just in one country, but all over the world. So it's like, on one hand, there really does need to be a service that women can perform. And on the other hand, men shouldn't have to be involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
Women, if we have, women going to war, I would not be opposed to having an all-female equivalent. Of the, like, and when I say equivalent, I'm using that term loosely, because when it comes to the physical end of things, there's just no comparison between men and women. Men have for centuries evolved doing things that women haven't been doing, and men handle things that women haven't handled, and men are stronger, faster, have better endurance. There's no question that on average, you put a group of men together and a group of women together, and you put them in a physical battle against each other, the men are going to win every time, right? But that doesn't mean that women should be sitting back on their butts and going, well, you get out there and fight for us. We used to have an environment where women were expected to put the brakes on. Like, don't send our men out there to fight for this. This isn't for us. This isn't for them. This isn't for our children. What the hell are you doing? Right? Women would protest against that. Now, it's like they've completely lost the pathway. Like, they're not doing that at all. They don't care. As long as their butts don't have to go. Aside from a very small few who want to pretend to be equal, and they'll go, and they discover that they're not when they get in a certain situation where they go up against men from another culture.
It's almost worth a little bit, just a little bit, of World War III, and so some kind of accompanying draft, just so that can knock some reality into these woke cunts.
Yeah.
So that they really, when, like I say, when the rubber meets the road, they can really know the difference between men and women. Because when there is a World War III, and I reluctantly mean when, not if, there's going to be a draft, and the lines are going to be drawn between biological men and biological women. And it's not going to be like it's drawn between sports.
Right.
It's gonna be biological men are sent to the front line. Biological men who identify as women might even be sent to the front line, but biological women, no matter how they identify, will not be sent to the front line, and they won't want to be either. No. Even the troons won't want to be sent there either. They'll be like, no, you can't send me there. But they'll be told anyway, no, you have to be, because you have the upper body strength to do it. and then maybe there'll be an argument as to, along the same arguments as to why women aren't sent to the front line. because the men on the front line tend to value women's bodies more than they value men's bodies, and so they're going to get this skewering of incentives. They're going to be like, we need to protect the women, and I don't know how that's going to work with trans women. Are they going to get skewed in the same way, or are they just going to be like, no, fuck him, he's just a troon? I don't.
They will not get treated like women. I think the portrayal in MASH was pretty good in terms of how people act in a situation where you're in a life-threatening environment, and somebody does something that is, for all intents and purposes, crazy. Corporal Klinger was faking, right? The point was that he was faking to get out of the war, that he had been drafted, and there were draftees that were sent to Korea. It was a show about the Korean War that was intended to be commentary on the Vietnam War, right? So you kind of had people think it was today, like a lot of people that didn't grow up watching it think that the setting was Vietnam. It wasn't. It was Korea. But Klinger was faking. He was, as soon as the war was over, he reverted back to full masculinity. He didn't act feminine anymore. But his whole goal was to be classified as 4F, meaning he didn't have he had a medical disability that would disqualify him for military service based on mental health, because gender dysphoria is considered a mental health condition, right? And I think that's probably the way it would be treated for pretty much. If you look back at the history of the draft during the Vietnam War, standards that were rock solid prior to the draft in terms of who could or could not be in the military, those just got abandoned. And right down to physical standards, your eyesight, whether or not you were gay. There were people that got court-martialed for being gay, but they didn't get out of getting drafted for being gay. There were people that got court-martialed for being unable to perform as they were supposed to due to medical issues that they had, but they didn't get out of getting drafted by having those medical issues. And, in the beginning they would have. But, for instance, my dad tried to enlist at one point in his youth, and they wouldn't take him because his eyesight was so bad. And then later, when he went back and forth between an emergency teaching certificate and being a college student getting his actual degree to become an educator, they tried to draft him, even though he was declared unfit for military service because of his bad eyesight. It doesn't do any good to send you over there with a gun if you can't hit the broadside of a barn.
Yeah.
Right? Most of the people you're going to be shooting at aren't that big. So, in any case, yeah, men, the standards on how the state deals with men get thrown out the window when the draft is enacted. And I agree. I think that if we subjected women to that, it would change everything. We would suddenly start realizing the unfairness of it, and we would be a lot more hesitant to just throw men into a war situation and get involved in other countries' business. That's just fact. We would not do that with women's lives like we do with men's lives. And that's one of the reasons why I support a female draft. I think that if we are going to allow our government to get involved in war with other countries, they should have to send women, and they should have to take take the flak for sending women. And I think that would severely limit their ability to do that. It would have to be worth it.
Yeah.
By the way, I've always been ineligible for military conscription because I have a heart condition. I was born with what's called a hole in the heart, which is an official medical condition because I was strangled by my umbilical cord in the womb. As such, I have a heart defect, which makes me ineligible for becoming military personnel. And I have to wonder to what degree that's going to make people ineligible for military combat, given just how many people are going to have heart conditions
You're right.
in the not too distant future, especially given that certain medical procedures were forced upon military personnel in the past few years. I guess it's not going to matter. So I guess even at the ripe old age of 40, I could still be conscripted because hey, I may have a heart condition, but hey, so does everyone else in the military.
Yep. Yep. Going on with the article. So the last thing we read was about increased awareness, increased training means that when these allegations come forward, they're not so easily dismissed, said Democrat State Representative Meg Froelich. So again, the translation for that is women should not need evidence, shouldn't have to provide evidence when they make an allegation against a man as a means of hindering his access to his right to custody, right? As a means of attacking his parental rights. So she goes on. Froelich said, women and children are not believed in court.
When do children... What do you mean?
Believed in court.
Do children testify in court?
Yeah, they do.
I mean...
That's
okay.
where the tell me on the doll where the bad man touched you meme comes from. Like, with children as young as toddlers have spoken in court, have testified in court.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the other thing that gets done in court is bringing in a child and showing the child's reaction to a person. This child is afraid of this person. Why is this child afraid of this person? Right?
Yeah.
So, which it's not very solid evidence. Like, children are afraid of people sometimes because they're ugly. Like, children are you can be afraid of, a child can be afraid of someone because mommy spent hours and days and weeks and months telling them that person is bad and dangerous and scary and wants to do bad things to them, and the person might have nothing to do with that in real life, and the child will still be afraid. And
that's exactly what lawyers do to children before
right.
they go on the stand.
The big issue I have with this is nobody should be believed in court. You don't get believed just because you say something.
Yeah.
You know, you can be believed talking about your experiences, but as soon as you're talking about an allegation against another person, there should be evidence. Your statement should never be enough to cause the state to take action against another person. They're not believed because of a feeling that they're acting in revenge, and they're hysterical, and they're using these allegations as leverage against the other parent, she said. So, again, I contend they're not believed because the court is supposed to act on evidence, and testimony is the least weighty of evidence.
How dare you! How dare you!
It's just amazing. So I was watching one of these Zoom court hearings with a woman who had 3 kids, the oldest of which was probably about 15 at the time, who was in a sexual relationship with her stepson, right? And the kids had been taken away from her, I think, at least twice. And this was the third hearing that she was at about custody, right? And, she's just giving all these excuses. Oh my God, I didn't know, and blah, blah, blah. And it's just amazing how women use excuses as reasons to justify their actions, but the actual reasons that would substantiate why she shouldn't be allowed these rights, these things, right? It's just, oh no, it shouldn't. No, these are actual legitimate reasons why you should not have your kids. Oh, but no. Those are just like any excuse she can find to try to deny the culpability is just that's her reason. Oh my God. Well, I didn't know that. Well, yeah, I gave weed to my the niece of my stepson, my husband's kid, whatever. I didn't know. And just the litany of excuses that this woman had throughout the at least 10 years that she had cases with the family courts. And she still thinks that she has a reason, that she has a case here.
And she does. She does it because she does have a case, because she will get away with it.
Right. Over and over and over again. And if there's not people that are thinking right, then they'll let her go on with this behavior. But it's just astounding when you listen to some of these people speak. It's never my fault. It's never my fault. I didn't know that this person that I was with who killed my ex-boyfriend was going to be a dangerous person to bring around my minor children. I don't understand the thought processes that go on in the minds of some of these women, but they do, and they can own businesses. And this is one of the things that really just irks me to death when we talk about, young women like 19 and 20 years old. Well, they can't legally drink, but they can legally own businesses, right? You can be legally tried as an adult under the law for violating the law, but they're not children. And we have to stop thinking of them as such, because they have agency,
So I want to clarify something real quick, because this is and this goes to No Name Required 1223 pointed out something, and feminists do this all the time. So a woman makes an allegation, and you don't cancel the person they're accusing. And you say, I'm sorry that you may have experienced that, but unless you can provide me with some evidence, I'm not going to act against this other person. Oh, you're accusing her of lying. That's not the way that works, right? The reality is this, and the example No Name Required gives is, quote, I saw the man shoot another guy. Hannah, quote, you're lying. And that's not the way it works. It's not you're lying. It's we're not going to convict the guy that you're pointing the finger at without physical evidence of the shooting. All right. So if you say I saw that man shoot another guy, well, first thing is you should be able to locate that other guy. Like, that other guy should be able to provide some evidence that he's been shot. There should be an injury. Possibly the ability to find where the bullet landed. And you should at least be able to prove the shooter had a gun. And you can do that when you shoot somebody, when you shoot a gun, It can leave powder burns on your hands. Like there's different things that you can look at that will prove the shooting took place, that there was a shooting victim, and then you can also talk to the victim if the victim is not dead. You can match bullet to gun, So somebody shouldn't be able to walk into court and say, well, yeah, I don't want my ex to have custody because I saw him shoot another guy. And like, okay, let's have some evidence of this shooting besides your word. Well, the same thing is true with abuse. He beat me. Well, did you have any injuries? Did you ever go for medical treatment? Did you ever tell anybody else about the beating? Did you leave the home for any length of time to get away from your abuser? Like there's plenty of ways to prove abuse, or at least to indicate that yes, there's a significant risk here. Well, what if she's alleging financial abuse? Okay, you should be able to go through the family finances and find evidence of that too. There is always evidence of that, starting with the like financial abuse happens when one individual controls all of the money and the partner doesn't have access to it and doesn't have any financial means to take care of themselves. So if you have a breadwinner in the family, but all of the checks are signed by the other person, or all of the spending that takes place is signed by the other person and not by the breadwinner, like that person might be controlling his money. Very rarely is the breadwinner a woman, right? At the same time, if you have a situation where the person making the money is the only person that ever signs for anything, and the person who doesn't have a job doesn't ever have any there's no evidence that they ever had any money, like that's a red flag too, right? So if they come along and say, well, I was financially abused, I was controlled, you can look into that and see if that was true or not. Whether or not they were prevented from getting a job, whether there was physical force used and stuff like that. So this is why I say, we don't just believe people when they stand on the witness stand and say things. Like, they can explain their reasons for doing something. Well, I did this because this is my belief on this. For instance, a woman can be on the stand and say, well, I didn't get a job because I was raised on the idea that women shouldn't work outside the home. All right, well, that's you can believe that because she's talking about herself. Nobody is more qualified to confirm what she thinks than she is. But if she says, I didn't work outside the home because Tony wouldn't let me, Tony wouldn't allow me to get a job outside the home, well, then you need some evidence that Tony was coercive or violent when she wanted to get a job in order to prevent her from being able to do that, or did other things to sabotage her ability to work, wouldn't allow her to drive, something along those lines. And that is something that is under attack. Like, that's what's under attack here. They want women to be believed when they say these things, without having to provide any evidence to back their statements.
Right.
And now they're going to use an appeal to emotion here. In Colorado, this has literally had tragic consequences, where we have had murder-suicides in the past few months of an abuser gaining custody and then taking their life and the life of their child, she said.
Is that when a woman drives a car into a lake with her children in?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
And which, I don't remember. I think that happened in Florida. But
it happens more often than
yeah. And here's the thing.
I'm trying to figure out who exactly they're talking about, because this doesn't sound like something that fathers would normally do. This sounds like something that mothers would do. So who are these abusers then abusing these kids?
If
she because it's not in color. It doesn't say, well, we
Yeah,
have had
they're
murder suicides in the last month. Well,
they're
who's
talking
doing it?
about let's see if I can see the names here. Oh, of course, that's one that's going to be... I think it's Brueche. I think that's Bruce. William Bruce and Liam Bruce. Confirmed murder-suicide. Teller County, Colorado. News article from January. Yeah. So
But
this does happen. I mean, both sexes of parents do this,
Right.
and it's not like it's not reasonable for us to say it never happens, because it does. It does. But if you look at statistics on child abuse, you'll find that the overwhelming majority of children who are killed by one parent are killed by their mother. And a large majority of those are infants. And the majority of them are boys. So, like, there's arguments in both directions on this.
That doesn't even account for the boys who were killed in the womb, which is becoming an increasing problem since mothers were able to discover the gender of their baby before they were even born. Now that they can kill the babies up to and including 9 months, they can do the inverse of the thing we're told they do in China, which they don't, because most people in China don't know the sex of their baby until it's born, and then only when they find out it's the gender that isn't legally enforced to look after them in life, then and only then do they drown those little girls in the toilet. But
there's another way that they usually, when they determine the sex of the child, they inject alcohol into the brain.
There's that too. Yes.
Like it's immediate. I don't actually see where. Okay. Yeah, I don't actually see where there were news stories about this guy having been accused of abuse prior to this this case. So I don't know. I'm like scanning for. Okay, so here we go. There's another case. Andrea Berry alleged sexual abuse of their daughter in a custody battle. Police deemed the allegations unsubstantiated. But Child Protective Services was acting on the case. But then they didn't, and the mother testified in court without any evidence. But then the daughter the father killed the daughter. So there's more than one instance of this. But this is situations where investigations were not being done when they should have been done. Like, when you make an allegation, it should be investigated, especially where a child is concerned. Now, again, in a situation like this, there's going to be evidence. And I hate to say this, but it may be that the investigation didn't take place because of the nature of investigating allegations of sexual assault of little girls. There's usually an examination that has to be done, and it's traumatic for the victim. And so accusers and women's advocates would like to eliminate that step. But because allegations get made against men who did nothing, you can't do that. And there's other reasons why it's very important for such an examination to take place on a child if such an allegation has been made. Being a child doesn't make you immune to sexually transmitted diseases. So if abuse has taken place, it is important that the child receives medical attention. And of course you have to do your best to make that as not traumatic as it can be. And it's really hard to do that. But just because it's really hard to do that does not mean that you should deny the child the medical care. And we have this tendency with kids who are sexually abused, like we want to pretend that going after the abuser solves the problems for the child. Like it stops the abuse from that abuser. But there's a whole host of other things that happen in the psychology of an abused child that are not addressed by simply jailing the abuser. Right? They're not addressed by eliminating the abuser from the equation. You still have medical issues that need to be addressed. And our society's tendency to want to not look at things that are disturbing puts us in a position where we neglect victims of childhood abuse, and in particular victims of childhood sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And it's even worse with boys because, at least with girls, a physical exam is likely to show evidence of the abuse. As unpleasant, as traumatic as a physical exam can be, you're at least going to find injuries. That's not necessarily the case with boys. So when a boy is rescued from an abuser, people don't necessarily, like if he doesn't get an STD, that's like, okay, well, the abuse is over, you can get back to your life now. The reason that we have this pattern of a history of being sexually abused in the histories of adults who sexually abuse other people, children or adult, is because we are failing to treat children who have been sexually abused as trauma victims whose psychology has been altered by the abuse and who need psychological treatment to recover from that. So,
because when women sexually abuse someone, it doesn't leave behind quite as much forensic evidence as when a man sexually abuses someone. If you get what I mean, I won't elaborate on what I mean by that, but I assume you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think everybody can figure that out. And like the one time that there is when a pregnancy occurs, but that doesn't always happen. Like it just in ideal circumstances, a heterosexual sex act has about a 20% chance of conception. So there's an 80% chance of no conception. So yeah. But yeah, this situation, like when I'm looking at these stories, and the failure was not in the courts. The failure was with the police department. The failure was with Child Protective Services. There was no investigation when there should have been an investigation. There was no paperwork filed when there should have been paperwork filed. Like the correction for that is to go to how those systems operate and correct the failure to investigate, the failure to file paperwork. There needs to be repercussions for that. We don't correct the failure to file paperwork by imposing a presumption of guilt.
Yeah. Absolutely. So another thing that I'll say is in watching these Zoom meetings, I saw a guy who was a provider for himself and a young child, and he was just guilty of traffic violations, right? Moving violations. He didn't have a license. He hit somebody. I think he had like a DUI or something, some wild shit. He just was driving for a long fucking time with no well, finally he turned himself in, and they were imposing his sentence, right? And I'm thinking about it, like, if a woman was in that same situation where she was the one providing for young children, how would the courts go on her? Like, how would the judge be on her? Would they be more lenient because she's the one actually caring for the kids, and she's gonna start crying and, well, I don't have anybody to take care of my kids? Well, the man is basically in the same situation, outside of the fact that he's providing for this woman who can take care of the child, but she's not working either. So it's basically the same situation, right? But why is it that he is just deemed this, he's a threat, he's a danger to, and I'm not saying that he's not a danger on the road, because he's got all of these violations, moving violations. He hit someone, he's bound to hit someone again. But a woman in the same situation, if she had young children at home, she has that excuse and will use it, and it'll just be accepted. Oh, she's got to take care of these kids. There's no one, or else she's forced to deal with the fact of her kids going into the system.
Yeah. Going on in the article, if we can pass this bill, we not only increase the training requirements, but we also then become eligible to participate in this federal funding program that really allows us to make robust changes to family court for a system that is really pretty broken, she says. There was mistreatment happening on a very severe level, said Leah Ricor, a mother of 2 daughters ages 10 and 13 who recently testified in favor of the bill. 8 years ago, Ricor decided to get a divorce. There's this expectation that you're going to get help, that there's going to be support, she said. Ricor said she expected the court system would help her family, including 2 young daughters. What the systems in place are doing is seeking to find peace. But that's just peace for them on paper, she said. It's not creating peace in these family dynamics. Mm-hmm. Ricor said years later the family court system has only made things worse. So we have not heard anything about Ricor being a victim or anything like that. So I just want to point out that in Colorado, just like in every state in the union, every other state in the union, there are federally funded women's shelters that provide women with federally funded advocates to go with them into the court system if they allege abuse. So if a woman, like, if I had not married my husband, right? If I had married the guy that tried to convince me that I had multiple personality disorder, like, instead of, like, leaving that relationship, and he had become even more abusive, which I don't know how, but maybe physically, like, I don't think that guy would have done that, but if his Munchausen's by proxy had gotten worse, and I had come to my senses and gone, gosh, I think I'm being abused, the first step to take would be to go to one of these organizations and tell them, this is happening to me and I don't know what to do about it. Because they take it from there. What the vexatious litigant did was she went to Artemis House here in Dayton. And Artemis House helped her go to the court and you go into the courthouse, you go talk to the clerk of courts, you allege abuse. You do not have to have filed a complaint with police or anything. and you get a 30-day temporary emergency restraining order, temporary order of protection. And then there's a hearing set somewhere within the next 30 days where you're supposed to be able to prove that there's some abuse taking place, right? And from there, they take you to police, they take you to medical personnel for examination, for evaluation and stuff, and try to create evidence. And if you are abused, that's not difficult to do. But if there's no evidence, then they try to strong-arm the court with guilt-tripping and ideology, to continue the restraining order anyway, to give you what you want. And then you can take that restraining order into custody court and say, look, this guy's abusive. I had to get a restraining order against him. And the judge in the custody court is supposed to consider the restraining order evidence of abuse, even if there is no other evidence of abuse, and act on that. And that racket has been going on for a long time. Now, if there really is abuse, and someone goes in to one of these organizations for help, their job becomes very easy. All they have to do is gather the evidence for the thing that is true, right? So if I had been in that situation, I would have had all the help I needed, but it would not have come from the court, because that's not the court's purpose. It would have come from Artemis House. It would have come from the YWCA. It would have come from, there's 12 organizations around this area that they're all interconnected. They work together. They network. That's it. And the court's involvement would have only been in response to things that the organization helped me do. Right? They would have gotten, if we'd had kids together, they would have gotten Child Protective Services involved if there was evidence of abuse of the kids, or if there was evidence that there might be abuse of the kids. Right? That's how that works. What these people are asking for is for training to be imposed on all court personnel, that when a woman comes in and alleges abuse, they shouldn't require any of the rest of that. No evidence, no restraining order, no involvement of a domestic violence victims advocacy agency, nothing. Just, she says she's being abused. Well, we have to take that very seriously. Can you prove you're not abusing her? And that's where this is going. She says, people are not educated. Judges are not educated to understand what's really happening. They don't see the patterns of abuse. All right? Judges being trained to see the patterns of abuse, to see what's really happening, if that's what's really happening. That's been a thing in place, a federally funded thing in place since 1994. Okay? So for almost, 30 years, 40 years? I gotta think about that. 30 years. But yet somehow they don't know. Somehow, after 30 years of feminist lobbied federal law and policy that covers this, the courts still don't know?
Right. Case after case after case. This work is, again, these Zoom meetings really highlight the work that these people do and the cases that these guys. I know what I do for a living, right? And I can just imagine what a judge does in a day. You have this docket where you have to deal with all of these people, and it's day in, day out, right?
Yeah.
You think that after sitting on a bench after 20, 30 years that these people haven't seen and heard all of the stories, they've heard all of the excuses, all of the lies, everything. No, they know. They're very well aware. They don't have to know. Well, look, at this point, if you're in front of them for these reasons, then they very much know what's going on in your household. And to think that they're ignorant of anything that's happening is just ridiculous. You know, you don't have to walk the walk. You don't have to live in these people's shoes to understand the dynamics of the household. You know, if shit's bad, it's bad, and there are clear signals when things are going wrong. You know, that may not be apparent to the people in the situation at the time, you idiots, but hey, if it's got to get to the point where you're talking to a judge, then, you really have to have a good excuse. You have to.
Yeah, these judges don't want to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
So they make sure they don't make the wrong judgment. Sorry. They make sure they don't make the unpopular judgment. Because if at any point they do, then they're going to make the headlines, and that's going to jeopardize their future as a judge. We at Honey Badger Radio have experienced this in Canada over another perhaps unrelated or perhaps related topic, and it's judges are just like anyone else. It's more than their job's worth. That's why we in Britain refer to these people as jobs worths.
Yeah.
Because they're the kind of people who say, "Oh, it's more than my job's worth," and so they don't do the right thing. They do the thing that lets them keep their job.
Right.
Yep, and their reputation. And like in the case of our situation, we had an interesting thing happen. It was pretty cut and dried in our favor. Like, in fact, to the point where the other side didn't even present evidence or show up. So the entirety of the evidence against us in court was tweets, angry tweets from other people about us being there. Like 25 people tweeted at the organization that we shouldn't be there. That was it. There was not. And then of course there were hit pieces that they referenced in court that didn't provide any evidence in the hit piece for any of their claims. So, and the accuser vaguely referenced unsavory things said in our live streams, but had zero examples to show the court. So you would expect that case wouldn't go in their favor, because we had all kinds of physical evidence against them. And we basically proved that the entire thing was orchestrated by an individual who was just using relational aggression to get rid of us. And it was pretty solid. And then a Supreme Court judge took an interest in the case and came in and talked to our judge. And then all of a sudden, we got a ruling that made no sense, cited no law, and was in contradiction to evidence presented in court. Cited things that were not presented in court, and didn't cite the actual evidence. In fact, like I said, it was in contradiction to the actual evidence that was presented in court. It actually made him sound senile, in my opinion.
If you could hurry up and get Trudeau the fuck out of there,
Yeah.
along with the Chinese fucking government behind him, that would be great.
Right.
Yeah, no.
But the point
one and
being,
the same.
my theory, and of course there's no other evidence to back this besides the fact that the judge's ruling made no sense, and the judge demonstrated sympathy toward us throughout the entire case until that Supreme Court justice came in and talked to him, is that he was told something that made him feel obligated to rule a particular way, regardless of what he thought or how he felt about the case, and that was that. So it's not. I don't think that the judge believed the claims against us. I think that the judge did what he was told. But again, this is my opinion, not something that I can say, gosh, we can solidly prove this. So take it with a grain of salt, because, like I said, due process. Nobody should act against a person on just the word of somebody who has suspicions. Those are my suspicions. There's no way for me to get the evidence to prove them.
My suspicions are Trudeau will be in power for the rest of his lifetime.
Probably. Little Castro.
Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong, Canada. By the love of God, prove me wrong.
Yeah.
Please.
Yep.
Please.
But yeah, so there you go. So yeah, people are not educated, judges are not educated to understand what's really happening. Well, no, actually, what's going on is that judges are not coerced enough toward accepting testimony that is not backed by any other evidence in order to correct possible flaws elsewhere in the system, where investigations that are merited are not being done, and paperwork is not being submitted when it should be submitted. Bureaucrats are not doing their job. So your due process rights are going to be sacrificed on the altar of we can't do anything about the bureaucracy. Right? That's basically what's being said here. She said advocating for her children's needs is also difficult because of the fear of it being misconstrued in court as defaming the other parent or hurting their reputation. Which, there's a defense against that. The defense against defamation is the allegation being true. If the allegation is true, it's not defamation. Right? It's holding someone accountable for their behavior. If you're making a criminal allegation, you should be able to prove that the crime happened, and the accused perpetrated it. Like that's pretty simple. Then you shouldn't be accused of defamation for that. But that would again require you to use the system in place for proving a crime. And again, if there are flaws in that system, and you're gonna ask for legislative changes, you address those flaws. Being afraid that just by asking for help that was me alienating against the other parent or making it more difficult for them to parent, she said, parental alienation involves a lot more than making an allegation. There's also that fear that if I say too much, my kids will be taken away. So again, I think we're listening to a woman who didn't have a solid case against her ex and wanted the court to act as if she did. Several years after filing for divorce, Ricor said she's still fighting to get the support and help needed for her kids. When we stand up and we advocate not only for ourselves, but on bills like this one, we're actually helping people we may never meet. We're helping people 10 years down the road. You know why? Because this kind of legislation never gets repealed. And in turn, shifting generational trauma, said Ricor. This is a big deal. It's not just about these families that are angry right now. If passed, HB 23-1178 would put Colorado in compliance with the federal Keeping Children Safe from Family Violence Act, which has restrictions on what experts and evidence can be used in court. There you go. Restrictions, not requirements, right?
Right.
Restrictions, meaning on who? The defense. So more likely than not, if you have a mother who is trying to manipulate the child, the father is restricted from bringing a parental alienation advocate, or expert, I should say, into court to advocate for his right to not be alienated.
Wow.
Yep. There's another bill tied to this proposed legislation, HB 23-1179, 1108, if that is passed.
Why do they all
force.
sound like viruses?
Yeah,
all of these bills sound like viruses.
Because they are.
Mm-hmm.
A task force would study training requirements for judges now in order to determine best practices and requirements for judges across the state. So there's what this bill is about. They're looking at increasing the restrictions on your defense if you are accused of abuse in order for your ex-wife to prevent you from having custody of your children. And they don't, they're citing flaws in the system that the bill doesn't address as reasons why the bill should be passed. So if you're in Colorado and you have legislators that you think would pay attention if you write to them or call them and stuff like that, we're talking about HB 23-1178 and HB 23-1108. I recommend reading them. You can do a search for Colorado HB and the numbers, full text and PDF. A lot of times that'll bring it up. In Maryland, what we're talking about is Senate Bill 13. And you would probably want to put the year on that. I don't think there's another bill in conjunction with Senate Bill 13. And I recommend also reading it and contacting your legislators. And if you don't live in those two states, be on the lookout because this will
coming
be proposed
soon to a town near you.
Right. If you're in Canada, if you're in the UK, if you're in any European country at all, actually, this will soon follow in your areas as well. This is the start, or possibly the crest even. This may have been going on for a while, and we just found these of the next wave of feminist attacks on fathers' rights. And again, like, this is their MO. They use demonization of fathers as deadbeats and abusers to get laws passed to not only allow the courts, but compel the courts to take action against fathers on the basis of mothers' allegations without relying on any other evidence besides the allegation itself. And that actually creates a situation where an abusive mother can get custody of the children on the basis of an allegation, as long as she's the first one that makes the allegation. And I have a feeling that if the father did make an allegation, he would not get the same benefit from these laws. They probably do the same thing as the Violence Against Women Act, where they claim the Violence Against Women Act is gender neutral, right? But all of the language in the Violence Against Women Act refers to victims as women and perpetrators as men.
Yep.
So, and that, I think, is it. We have covered the whole article. I didn't get a bunch of super chats. Let's see what comments we had on Rumble. Actually had quite a bit on Rumble here. So
nice.
None of it is paid, but Mr. 303. Okay, Hannah is telling the story. All is right with the universe. She's not replaced by a clone. I always have to tell the story.
Prove it.
And yeah, so I'm going to pronounce this wrong. I'm sorry. Avichin? It's A-V. It looks like A-V-E. The font that they use is kind of crappy here. It might be A-V-C-H-C-I-N, so that might actually be Polish, and I've really screwed it up then.
Don't even bother with Polish.
I was hoping with guys like Rakita and Crowder moving to Rumble, we'd see bigger view counts. Matching a bullet to a specific gun, that's what I was looking at. Isn't a thing. It's an unfortunate myth. It depends. There are ways that they can demonstrate that. This is most likely the gun it came from. Gunshot residue isn't necessarily helpful either. Sometimes it doesn't happen. You're right on that. Sometimes sometimes the testing fails too. That's true. Truffle Hunter says Colorado seems like gynocentrist central to me. Unfortunately, it's not. There are states that are even worse. There is no gynocentral in the United States. The whole country is like that. From stem to stern.
If you're able to hear something about these things, it's because there are some journalists who are ready and willing and legally capable, and indeed capable of doing so without being assassinated.
That is
who can report on these stories.
Yeah.
I would imagine this sort of thing happens on the West Coast all the time and on the East Coast all the time, but there just aren't enough. There isn't a critical mass of journalists for one of them to come through and report it without being shouted down by everyone else who might publish the story. You know.
You gotta remember, like, while we do make note of the fact that the coastal areas of the United States are population centers for wokeism, the model that feminists use to describe domestic violence incorrectly and impose law and policy incorrectly and so on came out of Minnesota. Like right in the middle, right? I believe it's the Duluth model, and it's Duluth, Minnesota. So we're looking at this is everywhere. Like,
but it comes from centers of control,
right? It does come from centers of control,
largely cities, which tend to be largely coastal, like everywhere in the world.
But every state in the
coastal
union has
cities.
Yeah, every state in the union has a population center, and it's more likely to be a blue area. And this is I think this is Av Hein, actually, says, "How dare you accuse me of being Polish?" So I will simply say this. I guess I can't accuse you of being related to that side of my family. But yeah, that's it for Rumble. Let's look at if I can freaking find it. Go all the way up here. I'm in our live chat, and I'm looking for the Super Chow channel, where we have Meredith G gave us $5 and said, honey for the badgers, and thanks for the interesting conversation. And that is it for all of the super comments of any kind that came from people who...
One of these days, say something, Meredith. We fucking love you. You're always supporting us, yeah. and you hardly ever say anything. We want to know what you have to say.
She's awesome. Meredith is awesome. I love.
I know. We all love Meredith. That's why I wanted to say more things.
Yeah, definitely say more things. Yeah. But with that, I will thank you all for listening. This was a particularly pungent sausage. So thanks for listening to the pungent sausage. Thanks to my two co-hosts for talking about this with me. This is an issue that I am in particular really passionate about, and due process is, if you get rid of the fundamental right of due process, you no longer have free citizenship.
Yeah,
like, it's gone.
Absolutely.
And if you break down the family and you take away parental rights, you no longer have a next generation's freedom either, because they get brainwashed as children. So, this is probably my most fundamental issue in terms of men's issues. Everything else I advocate on is important, right? But this is my bottom line. So thanks you guys for coming on and talking with me about this, and thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines. dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.